Most depictions of the late 19th century focus on the sweeping romance of the era, but the historical righteous army lived a different experience. They were farmers and laborers who slept in the mud, clutching antique hunting rifles while facing an industrialized military power. At this time, Joseon was a vulnerable kingdom, trapped between the expansionist goals of Imperial Japan, Tsarist Russia, and the United States. It was a proxy war in all but name, with foreign warships frequently appearing off the coast to demand trade concessions and political influence. While foreign empires pressured the borders, the internal social structure was already at a breaking point. Joseon utilized a rigid caste system that treated its lowest citizens as property. These laborers and slaves provided the physical power for the elite, yet they possessed zero legal rights and no path towards social mobility. Despite being brutalized by their own government, these marginalized citizens became the primary volunteers for the national defense. Men who had been denied basic humanity by their own laws were the first to put themselves in the path of the advancing Japanese forces. To understand how the kingdom survived as long as it did, we have to look past the royal lineage. The defense of the peninsula fell to a specific group of individuals who organized themselves when the formal institutions of the state began to dissolve. Emperor Gojong attempted to navigate this crisis through a series of superficial modernizations. He adopted Western-style military uniforms and decorated himself with ornate medals. But these symbols of power did not translate into a functional defense. The royal leadership remained politically paralyzed as foreign advisors infiltrated every level of the administration. New infrastructure appeared in the capital, with electric trolley lines and telegraph wires cutting through ancient neighborhoods. However, this technical progress occurred simultaneously with the rapid loss of political sovereignty. As the city modernized, the kingdom's ability to govern its own territory was steadily stripped away by foreign treaties. As the formal royal army was forced to disband under foreign pressure, the concept of the Uibyang, the righteous army, returned to the forefront. This was a civilian militia tradition where ordinary people took up arms specifically because the professional military was no longer able to fight. The responsibility for the nation's survival was forced out of the palace gates. It landed in the hands of the commoners who lived along the mountain passes and provincial trade routes. Within these militias, the traditional aristocracy, known as the Yangban, had to reconsider their role in society. In the popular narrative, we see the archetype of the noble woman sniper, representing the segment of the elite that chose to use their resources for the resistance. Choosing to join the righteous army meant these aristocrats had to facilitate the destruction of their own social standing. They were hunted by colonial authorities, and their participation often led to the immediate seizure of their ancestral lands and the execution of their family members. The historical record shows that these elites liquidated their massive family fortunes in secret. They converted land and grain into portable currency, which was then smuggled across the northern borders into Manchuria to purchase modern rifles and winter supplies for the guerrilla units. For the nobility, participation in the resistance required the dismantling of the very social and economic systems that had granted them their power for centuries. The majority of the fighting force came from even lower social strata. Runaway slaves and members of the butcher caste, known as the Baekjeung, formed the backbone of the local militias. These were individuals whom Joseon law had historically categorized as subhuman. This demographic chart illustrates the reality of the militia's composition. Common peasants and low-caste laborers made up over 80% of the active combatants. They were the ones most likely to be killed in skirmishes, and they provided the local intelligence necessary for guerrilla warfare. The consistent participation of this lowest tier is a significant historical detail. Despite having the least to gain from the current administration, they were the most persistent in their efforts to repel foreign influence. Inside the militia camps, the traditional social hierarchies began to dissolve. Survival in a guerrilla unit depended on practical skills like tracking and marksmanship. This created an environment where a former slave could command a unit that included members of the fallen nobility. The lower classes fought to secure a future that looked different from the past. Their goal was the establishment of a new society where their basic humanity would be recognized by the state. The military conflict was characterized by a massive technological gap. The righteous army used outdated matchlock muskets against a Japanese military that had fully transitioned into an industrialized power. The imperial forces possessed modern artillery, naval support, and a professionalized command structure. The tactical goal of the militias was guerrilla disruption. They understood that a conventional military victory was impossible, so they focused on cutting telegraph lines, attacking supply depots, and forcing the imperial army to commit thousands of troops to policing the countryside. By 1910, the weight of the occupation became absolute. Joseon fell, and the formal annexation began a period of colonial rule that would last for 35 years. The decision to fight against such odds was a calculated effort to preserve the idea of independence. These soldiers chose to sacrifice their lives to provide a foundation for the resistance movements that would follow in the coming decades. The survivors of these early militias eventually crossed the borders into China and Russia. In the 1920s, they reorganized into the professional independence armies that would continue the conflict for the next quarter century. This portrait captures the face of that resistance. He was one of thousands who lived and died without their names being recorded in official histories. Modern research into this period focuses on these ordinary people. Their lives were the inspiration for the dramatic series, which serves as a monument to those who stepped into the conflict when their leaders chose to surrender. If you appreciate this look at the authentic history behind your favorite stories, please subscribe to the channel. We have more deep dives into the lives of unsung patriots planned for the coming weeks. While emperors and diplomats sign the documents that end a nation's sovereignty, the survival of its culture is secured by the ordinary people who choose the difficult path of justice.